Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the Jeff Goldblum movie, The Fly. This was done in 1986 because there is actually a black and white version of this movie. Also, there is a actual sequel from this film called The Fly 2. I had seen the sequel to this movie before I actually finally got to see this film. Really, I have never actually watched this film. I've seen bits and clips of it somewhere, but I've never fully fledgedly watched the entire film. Now that I have, I can understand why there's quite a bit of people that would probably watch this film and go, hey, 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 hey. But really, for me, it kind of gets to the point where I'm just like, yeah, this is like really, really gross. But I have also seen The Thing. Like, I have seen not only The Thing, but also its remake. And like this movie gets pretty gross. It does compared to those, but like to the point of like when he's just like doing things, let's just say with his teeth. Oh my god! Like this was an adventure, for sure. An adventure, but something that I kind of wanted to finally watch and finally just say that I had seen because really, like, I always wanted to get to the point where I'm kind of notching those movies of like I've never seen it, so I should kind of things, and so a lot of people might think out of like you like have never seen this one, like man, you could have gone out of your way to lived your whole entire life avoiding this movie. But like for me, I'm just like, you know what, like I really wanted to finally watch this film. Like to me, I really wanted to see uh like what the story was because I didn't know exactly what the story was. I just saw a man coming out of a pod, and to me, I was like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, what's the actual story here? And then once I understood the story, I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. So, really, for people who have never heard of this movie in their life or don't know the actual story because they've never seen this film because they've heard horror stories of how bad this movie is, really to me this movie kind of comes into a combination of uh like almost like exorcist, kind of like we have a lot of times with a character who is already ugly looking at some point in this movie, no offense to Jeff Goldblum, who is uh a handsome man, handsome, debonair, always a delight to see on film. But in this movie, eventually, he totes that line of having us also be like, Jeff Goldblum, no! Don't just immediately just go, what? In yuck? No, Mr. Goldblum, no. But it's like, well, hey, like I got paid. Like, here's the thing. Like, I think for this movie, man, did Jeff Goldblum have to do a lot in this film. Like, there's a lot of rigorous things that he had to do for this film. And I'm like, man, like, he had to carry woman up flights of stairs and all kinds of things. Like, he had to do some, like, gymnast, like, dismount, like, thing of him showing, like, he is now, like, very strong and has the ability to do any number of things, seemingly with this transformation, let's just say. So let's try to tee up this story because I'm going to run out of time here pretty soon about what this movie actually is. So we end up having a news reporter who ends up bumping into a guy in some restaurant who is telling that he has this big invention, that he has something big planned. And so we have it to where this reporter is like, well, I'm going to be latching onto this guy. Like, this is the only guy in town that seems that uh, he has something that I can write about. So we find out that Seth character Seth Brundle, who is Jeff Goldblum's character, had invented a teleporter of sorts. And so we find that Jeff's character, Seth, can only go and at first try and teleport items, like, say, a stapler or a pin cushion, stuff like that. And so that starts off that way, but we have where Seth is really trying to push this thing to try and see if he can figure out how to teleport living things. It seems he ends up trying to teleport animals, but that doesn't work. And so we have Seth, who is desperately trying to figure out how he can teleport a living thing. And so we have Seth, who is to try and teleport meat and see like how different a normal meat could be with the teleported meat. Like if someone could taste the difference, and so someone could. So really, we have it to where Seth had figured out by teleporting meat that he needs to work his machine to help understand uh, that his machine needs to try and get attracted to the factor of teleporting something that is living. Like it has to get used to the fact, and uh, it has to try and understand what it is it's teleporting. And so we eventually have uh, Seth teleporting an animal, which that eventually works. So we have Seth, who is just so stubborn and just so reckless. He eventually ends up teleporting himself from portal or from pod to pod. And so that one night of drunken stupidity ends up winding Seth into a lot of problems after that, to where eventually we start to see Seth slowly but surely mutating and eventually turning into a fly. And so we also have an interesting story that eventually goes along with with this. Here's also the interesting thing. So the sequel to this movie actually does tie into this film, where we have Veronica's character, who is actually in a sequel part of this film, and we eventually have a interesting story go along with the sequel, but it's kind of very much tamer compared to its original, from what I remember. But eventually, I might have to go back into that and kind of look into it because, like, I do remember that really the sequel really ties into what happens with this film, and maybe I'll talk about it towards the end of this spoiler, or it might be a thing that I forget. So, with that said, I've spoken long enough about this movie. Let's get into spoilers because really, this movie is really just like it kind of gets to the point where it's like let's wait for Jeff to start having pieces starting to fall off on the man. Like I think really there was one like there was a couple parts in this film where I was like ew, like yikes, like especially when Jeff Goldblum ends up doing the arm wrestling thing. Oh my god. Like I was like Jesus. like man, like that's some gross like that just makes you get really freaking concerned about you ever arm wrestling anybody and your arm just uh yeah, yeah, that really is just a gross out point in the movie. But anyways, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to do spoil this movie. I apologize if that arm wrestling scene kind of spoils a little bit of this movie, but really, the main event is you coming into here and watching eventually a man fall apart, which happens within this film. So, like I said, so we have Veronica who is going on to try and figure out what her next news article is, without really Seth even knowing that this woman is a news writer. So we also find that Veronica is having her boss also, they are like mixed together. We have Veronica and Stratus, or Stathis, Boronus, Borons. Good God. Let's go with Stat for short. Stathis. Good God, what a name. Borons. Stathis Borons. Let's call him Stat for short. So we have Veronica, who seems to have a ex-lover who just won't let go. And so he won't let go because also he works with her in the newspaper article biz. Like, he's basically her editor or her like superior, and I guess she had a relationship with this guy, and so like he's basically tailoring what all she does, kind of controlling what she does. At some point, we have Stat who ends up going into Veronica's home, and Veronica's like, well, like, why are you here? Like, you don't live here anymore. And Stat is like, well, I still have the key. And Veronica's like, give me the key. Give me the key. So let's start back in the beginning. So we have Seth, who is to take Veronica after their quick dinner together. And so Seth is kind of boasting about how he had invented something, because it seems that he is to be working with, I think, some kind of university sorts. Like, I think he's kind of one of those like Big Bang Theory kind of guys where this or like Ghostbusters, where like he ends up getting funded from this place, and it seems that his equipment for the most point is fairly cheap. And so this place just continues to fund Seth's projects. It seems that whatever Seth is to eventually invent, this facility will eventually, that he is being funded by, will eventually keep. And so we have it to where Veronica is asking Seth, it's like, well, has anybody helped you with this experiment? And Seth goes, it's like, well, every once in a while I'll ask somebody to build me a laser here, or a thing there to help me overall with this project, but they don't even realize what the end goal is. It's basically like the Batman Begins, where we have this guy who is ordering parts from some other side of the world, and like it's little bits and parts to eventually become the Batman suit. And so nobody is the wiser. And plus, like, they'll bring contractors from out of town to build things that they aren't really actually sure what it actually is. Like, it's kind of like that. So we have Seth, who is to ask Veronica if she has any jewelry or anything like that has sentimental value to her of some kind of sorts. So we have Veronica who gives Seth her thing of hosiery, and so we have Seth who is to take the hosiery and put it into one pod, and then start the pod up, and the hosiery goes from one pod to the other. And Veronica, of course, just assumes it's some kind of magic or something. And so Seth is to say, no, it's the real McCoy. It's not magic. And so we have Veronica's like, well, like, this is a really interesting story. It's like, well, like, how far have you gotten? And so we have Seth mentioning that he's only been able to teleport uh, items or objects or whatever, like nothing that is ever living, because he had tried to teleport a baboon, but that baboon didn't exactly come back alive or barely alive. So really, Seth had to kill the very first baboon because it was just a mess on the floor. It was just an awful mess. So we go on, and so we have really. It seems that Veronica and Seth are quickly getting intimate because Veronica is seeing how much of a cash cow that this guy is going to be, how big of an article that eventually, at some point, this is going to be. So she easily just starts falling for Seth. She ends up in bed with him. And so she ends up starting to uh, like kiss him and love on him. And Veronica mentions to Seth that uh, like kissing him is kissing uh, like a old lady kissing a baby. It's like the whole flesh of it all, and that it just seems so like enticing to go and kiss a baby, and as long as it's like related to you, as long as it's not like an estranged baby that you like picked up somewhere, like baby. Anybody, baby? So we go on, and so we have Seth who's like, wait a minute, like I figured it out. So we have Seth who is to go and teleport meat. And so Seth teleports meat and then cooks the meat and has Veronica try it. And so she can tell the difference between what the normal meat tastes like and what the teleported meat tastes like. It seems like the teleported meat tastes much more synthetic. And so we have Seth who's like, God, like I figured it out. Like, so he figured out that his machine needs to come to terms with the fact that it is teleporting a live thing, and the machine has to get an attraction to the fact that it is teleporting a live thing because it's been so used to uh, teleporting animated objects, and so we have to get the machine to digitally understand what it's actually teleporting and digitally understand that it's uh, like a living, breathing thing. And so we have Seth going and teleporting Babu number two. And so it seems that Babu number two is to seemingly be fine. And so we have Veronica who is going and talking to Stat. And we have immediately where it seems Seth is getting very jealous of Veronica spending time with Stat because it seemed Veronica had spent so much time with Seth, but now she is shifting to go and talk to uh, Stat about this report. It seems like Stat is trying to change what Veronica is working on, and Veronica is like, no, like this is going to be a huge story, like just like because I think Stat just does not want Veronica with Seth because they're getting close to one another. So yeah, it's that whole thing. So we have Seth, who is very drunk and is just kind of stewing about Veronica, quite possibly somehow or another getting back together with Stat, because it seems like she's taking a fairly long time talking to him, convincing him of what she is trying to do. So we have Seth, who is looking at his baboon, and realizing, you know what, like this baboon is all in good health. We had Seth who was going to take some tests on the baboon and see if he was okay, but Seth was just drunk and also just deciding, like, you know what, how about I just teleport myself? Like, what bad could happen? And so we have Seth who is to go into the teleport and teleport himself. And so it seems that Seth is really actually feeling in way better shape than what he had before. It seems that he has a ton of energy. It seems that where he would normally do a chin up, he's actually doing these like gymnastic spins around and like this acrobatic circus gymnastic like move, and then dropping onto the ground like as if he's some like circus uh, thing. And so we eventually have really Seth seeming to be in much better shape than he probably has ever been. And then eventually Veronica is starting to see hairs on the back of Seth's back and like unusual hairs. So Seth thinks nothing of it, but both Seth and Veronica eventually go to dinner together, and Seth is getting very antsy. It seems like he's speedily talking, and like he is asking for like the waiter, and the waiter isn't coming. So Seth again asks for the waiter again, and Veronica's like what happened to you? Like slow down. We have Seth who's putting sugar in his coffee, and he's never done that before, and all kinds of things. He's becoming a very different person. And so we have Seth and Veronica who are continuing to sleep with one another. And then eventually we have Veronica who is telling Seth, you know what? Like, you are different, and I don't think you are realizing how different you are becoming. Like, your face looks different. Your like you're still growing hairs on the back of your back. We have it to where Veronica had sent the hairs out for tests, and it seemed that the hairs weren't actually human. And so Seth is like, well, what does that mean? So we have eventually where Seth is really just getting angry at Veronica because he wants her to go through the pod like he did. Because really, Seth is thinking that also both of these Veronica and Seth were in the movie Earth Girls Are Easy. If you guys remember that film, you probably don't. It had Jim Carrey in it, and I think it had one of the Wayans brothers in it as well. Uh, I remember that movie, but I just remember now that these two were in that film. So, uh, anyways, going into this film, so we have Seth and Veronica who are to just. Veronica is not wanting to go through the pod, and Seth is like, no, like, it's fine. Like, if anything, I'm fine. And so that's when Veronica kind of hits him with, like, nah, like, if anything, you're actually looking fairly different. If anything, uh, it feels like it seems like there is something wrong with you. To where we eventually just have Seth and Veronica. Seth just breaks up with Veronica because he's like, you know what? Like, I'm fine. Like, if anything, I'm just like, I'm sick of you. Like, you won't go through the pod, and you'll be fine. And I just want to see, and I just want to see what happens when you go through the pod. And I want you to be just like me, where you are going to be uh, as fit and fine and the same as me. You're going to come out much better after the end of this. So Veronica refuses and dumps Seth, or Seth dumps Veronica. Veronica eventually is starting to realize that she is pregnant, pregnant with Seth's child, and so Veronica eventually goes back to Seth to uh, to try to let him know, but every time she tries to talk to Seth, like she can't get the words out. So Seth is going out on a night in the town trying to find another pod woman for him to bring back so that way he can try to get a woman into the pod so she can be just like him. So we have Seth who is to go get a girl because here's what happens. We have Seth who is to uh, go and do a arm wrestling match in some guy within this bar. And so we have this arm wrestling match where Seth seems to have some like juice like grip with this arm wrestler because Seth bids $100 to any guy that's going to lose against Seth. So they do this arm wrestling match, and so Seth ends up breaking this guy's hand to where the bone is popping out of this guy's arm. I'm like, ew, Jesus. So we push on, and so we have Seth winning over this girl, and consistently we're having Seth eating these candy bars. And I thought that that was interesting because we have people making fun of him, but we consistently just see Seth just popping off these candy bars. So we eventually go on, and so Seth is to bring this gal home, sleep with her, and eventually he is to ask her to go into the pod, and we have this gal that's like, no, like I'm not interested in going to the pod. So we will consistently just have Seth, who just can't find a woman to bring him home to pod, so to speak. Instead of bring him home to Ma, bring him home to pod. So we have this girl who is to basically run away from Seth, and so Veronica is to come back and try to tell Seth that she is pregnant, but the words can't seem to come out. So we have it. We have Veronica who's trying to just say like, "Well, I just wanted to see you. Like, I just wanted to just, like, I wanted to be with you." But we eventually, at some point here soon, will start to see Seth slowly but surely start to fall apart, to where Seth is to eventually have Veronica record some of Seth's progress in the horror of which that he is to go through. First, it starts off that he starts losing his nails. And so he ends up just chewing on his nails, and then eventually one of them comes off. And then we eventually find out that there is some kind of ugly, nasty discharge that ends up coming from one of his fingers. And so then shortly after that, we start to see Seth's body start to bulge out. It seems his body starts to become deformed. And eventually he starts to lose his teeth because he has a problem eating to where it seems that he can not eat anymore. He ends up having to Ralph the food to then do something after that, which I will try not to describe to people because that is gross. Luckily, this isn't actually captured on film because then I would have probably been sick. But that's just what happens in this film. That's the disgustingness of this film. But like really, like to me, I was like, dude, I've seen The Thing. I've seen all kinds of stuff. I've seen The Exorcist, man. I am battle hardened from this movie. I'm like battle hardened from every movie, even though, like, to me, I think the part once we come to really just Seth losing his teeth was just like, wow, Oakley Dokley. Like, that was just like, yeah. So we go on. We have Seth, who is starting to heavily lose his hair, heavily start to just be very deformed. And so we have Veronica, who is now having nightmares about what her child is going to be, is going to become. And so she has a nightmare about giving birth to this baby, and the baby looks straight up like a worm or some other gross thing. And so we have a Veronica that is very worried, and so she talks to Stat about what this baby could quite possibly look like, what it could be. And so eventually Veronica is to tell Seth eventually that they're having a baby together. And so Seth is like, well, yeah, like, I definitely want you to keep the baby because this might be the last remaining thing of what could have quite possibly actually been just me. Could have been just like me before the whole pod situation. And so, to the point, Jessica goes to try and get a abortion, and we have Seth breaking through this glass to try and retrieve Veronica, to try and stop her from doing this, to just try to convince her she needs to keep the baby. So we have Seth and Veronica going together, and so we also see Seth, who has the ability of being almost Spider-Man, sticking to walls and all kind of interesting things. He doesn't have the ability to fly, and I don't think he ever will, because he probably should have like grown wings. Like, if he didn't have wings already, he wasn't going to grow them now. So we push on, and so we are to have Stat, who is kind of very, very concerned of Veronica, that Veronica doesn't really have her own will, and plus also, like, Stat is getting to the point of being this really just jealous ex-lover, to the point of him going and buying a gun to go and shoot this thing that I guess he would at some point call a freak, I guess. So we have Stat coming to Seth's place with a shotgun or a rifle or whichever it is. So we have Stat coming in to try and kill Seth, and so Seth ends up going and basically doing a little Ralph Nader on Stat, to where Seth's yakking is so strong that he is to start to be able to dissolve body parts, like limbs. And so Stat's hand gone, Seth's attachment between his foot and leg gone, and so we have Veronica, who is trying to reason with Seth, because at some point Seth had mentioned to Veronica that that Seth wants to become a bug politician, or a bug person, that is to say, when he cannot control what he is to do next. Seth mentions to Veronica that he uh, wants Veronica to never come back and see him, but she does anyways because Seth comes for her. And so Seth mentions to Veronica that he might kill her because he is starting to slowly but surely not know the difference of much anymore. And so at this point, we have Seth, who is technically trying to defend himself against Stat, and then Veronica is to like, oh, please don't kill Stat. And so we at this point just have Seth full on turning into a fly. And so we have Seth, who is desperately wanting Veronica, him, and the baby to all be in a pod together so that way they can all be one happy family, all twisted and twined in together through a pod. And I'm like, wow, okay, gross thought, thinking, whichever. And so Seth is to put Veronica into her pod, and Seth is to go into the other. And we have Stat, who is to shoot off the electricity going to Veronica's pod, and then shoots open Seth's pod, and Seth opens his pod to try to get out of it, and he ends up getting teleported, and ends up teleporting and coming back wrong. So we have Seth as this bug who is to basically see Veronica with her gun in hand. And so we have Seth who just has her, or has Veronica put the gun to his head to basically just say, just end it, just take me, just do it. And Veronica is in tears at this moment because it's like, this is the man that she did love, that she's having a baby with, or if that's what she wants exactly. And so we have Veronica that shoots Seth in the head, and Seth is now gone. And so really that's just how the movie ends. That doesn't have a conclusion of telling us like, okay, well, she had the baby, ba 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 ba. I guess that's what the sequel is for, but like the sequel does not tie in Veronica, I don't believe. It's been such a long time since I've seen it. But like they basically, I think, just reuse footage from her delivering in the dream sequence in this movie to reuse in the sequel, where we have so the guy that is the fly in the sequel is Jeff Goldblum's baby, because what ends up happening is we are to assess or assume like Veronica's baby that she delivers at first looks alien when it first appears, but eventually they end up breaking the this seal or this cocoon to find out that this baby is a seemingly normal human baby at first. And this fly is actually is a really kind guy. He's very nice. Eventually, he lands a girl, and then eventually he ends up turning into this big, huge fly monster. So yeah, like I think the fly is much more tamer because eventually, like we do have Guy turning into fly, but like I think in that movie, bizarrely, like you could actually root for the fly in that film because I think I actually was rooting for the fly in the sequel film. Just because the guy that he ends up having to go after is a guy that I actually did not like in that movie. So, yeah, so it was kind of like bizarrely like you were rooting for the fly who was in that sequel movie. So, with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here so I can go out of my way to say that I've seen another film and review it. So, goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.